This episode contains material that might be triggering for some. If you need to stop the podcast at any time to take care of yourself, please do so.
If you need support, you can call the 24/7 National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255. Dialectical behavior therapy was created in the 1980s by Marsha Linehan in Seattle, Washington.
Today, DBT is taught all over the world.
We're two therapists who believe everyone can benefit from DBT skills.
I'm Kate.
I'm Michelle.
And this is DBT and Me. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Q&A number 30.
Woo! Milestone Q&A.
Yay! Neither one of us have anything particularly special for 30, but yeah, just
30, flirty, and
it's
thriving. I probably shouldn't say that
go.
because copyrighted, I'm sure, from 13 going on 30. That's what I think of.
Oh. I like it.
Love that movie.
All right, well, you, I think, are starting us off. Oh, I was going to say, see, I'm already brainless. No, I just wanted to own that I have a pretty bad headache today, so I might sound a little more dampened and or a little bit, dumb. I don't know about you, Michelle, but, different headaches, headaches in different parts of my head feel like they impact me differently. Mm-hmm. And, this one's right in the front. Oh. And so, when I have headaches that are, in, the front of my head / in my face a little bit, I always feel more Yeah.
I think that makes sense.
Just a little bit dumber. Other parts are just ow, or, make me feel almost sick. But the ones in the front of my head are just my IQ drops by 15 points or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So anyway, I apologize in advance should it be necessary.
You're all good.
But
I bet you'll have great things
you're
to say.
Starting.
You're am starting, yeah. So this first one reads, how have others coped in intimate relationships? My partner reacts aggressively, then it says in parentheses, shouting / verbal abuse that continues even if I try to find quiet space, which just triggers absolute rage. I really am struggling to decide whether to leave the relationship or not, which is really hard when I split or dissociate.
Yeah, that does sound hard. And I wanted to just, validate for this person and anyone else in a similar situation that sounds really hard no matter what other struggles you might have in your life, right? This person talks about splitting or dissociating, so I'm admittedly assuming a little bit, especially from the use of splitting, that this person has or identifies as having the borderline personality disorder diagnosis. But I think you could have any diagnosis or no diagnosis, and it's still a struggle to figure out how to react, how to process, what to do about having a partner that reacts in a way that's triggering for you, right? That really sets you off. Really kind of no matter what it is, but especially if it's something that's, abusive. So I just wanted to say, first and foremost, that sounds like a really shitty situation to be in. And just, apologize or give my, not a condolences. Oh, for fuck's sake. Anyway, sorry, it sounds shitty. There we go. But after that, the next thing I thought about was that I didn't feel like giving a real recommendation since we have such a tiny little blurb to go on and not a lot of information. How long has this person been in a relationship? Has their partner always been this way, or is it a new or temporary thing? How bad is the friend? Blah, 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 blah. So, I didn't want to give a hard and fast recommendation of some sort. By the tiny little bit that we have, my sort of, if I were off of absolute center in any direction, it would be slightly leaning towards leaving. But that's just because I feel generally protective of people in situations like that. Or in situations that sound like that. Again, we don't have a lot of information about this person's situation. But just to try and add in something skill-oriented, is that I would recommend not trying to figure out whether to leave the relationship or not when you're in a state of, being splitting or being dissociated, but instead try and find like a wise mind space in which to think about it when you're not in one of those situations, when you're not in conflict with the partner, when they're not reacting that way, and also when you're not in, separate from the partner, when you're not in a state of splitting or dissociating, right? Because those are not good places to make wise mind decisions, right? You're too flooded probably in all of those situations to really access a wise mind kind of space. So I would say sometime when you're ideally away from your partner and sometime when you're having a better mental health day, take that time to sit down and really, think about it and try and get into a wise mind space from which to consider your different options. So those were my thoughts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't have too much to offer by way of skills either. I'm just going to be sharing some of my thoughts and some of the things that I share with clients that I work with when they're in this situation.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the biggest things that I look at when I'm working with people in romantic relationships, I don't really care so much what the two people in the relationship are fighting about or how often they're fighting.
Pardon me. Mm-hmm.
But I do care about what it looks like in terms of finding resolution. Like, how are they fighting? So even if you're fighting all the time about a wide variety of things, that doesn't mean the relationship is doomed. I get concerned when couples, even if they are rarely fighting, when they fight, have responses like what this listener is describing, where one or both people are reacting really aggressively towards the other. Because the thing about being in a long-term relationship is that it's so important to choose someone where the two of you are able to come together to work on your problems. So again, I don't care what those problems are. I don't care how frequently they come up. That's the thing that I look for, is are the two of you able to come together and essentially tackle it as a team? I don't know if that can happen here if one person is reacting aggressively. And then I'm also not sure exactly what this listener quite meant, but it said my partner reacts aggressively, which just triggers absolute rage. So I assume they might mean rage within them. So then you have two people who are not in a very good headspace. And I worry when I hear about those things, right?
Yeah.
A lot of anger, a lot of aggressiveness, defensiveness, sometimes criticism, or anything like that is just poison in a relationship. So this does concern me. Like Kate said, we don't have a whole lot to go off of here, but I get concerned when I hear that those are the kinds of reactions when conflict is happening. Mm-hmm. It's not great. Also kind of building off of what Kate was saying in terms of trying to just find your wise mind when you're not in a state of splitting or dissociating and you're not in conflict with your partner at the time, I would just really encourage you to look at, which sounds so Debbie Downer, and I don't mean it this way, but if this doesn't change, then what? Because I think sometimes people can really take this approach of my partner will change. Like, sure, this is really hard right now, but they're not always going to be like this. This will get better. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that happens. And sometimes that doesn't. And I don't have a crystal ball to know which way it could go for this listener in their relationship. I have no way to know. But the thing about radical acceptance is that we want to look at what is right now in this moment. And we can't necessarily, again, make this judgment call that it's going to be this way forever, because it may not be. But when we catch ourselves in this wishful thinking place of like, my partner's going to change, my partner's going to change, I'm just going to hang in here for a couple more months or even a couple more years, and they're going to change, right? They're going to change when X, Y, or Z happens. That can be a handy way to avoid looking at what is. and radically accepting what's right in front of you right now. And so I would encourage you to look at that. What is in front of you right now? And what if what is in front of you right now doesn't change? Then what? How does that influence you when it comes to deciding to stay in this relationship or to leave? Because again, I can't tell you how many people I work with where they're like, I'm so unhappy in this relationship the way it currently is, but right, they're hanging in there because they have this hope. And I don't want to tell them to not have hope. Like, that feels so terrible. Again, especially when I have seen some people's relationships genuinely turn around and their partner genuinely make changes. I don't want to tell people to not have hope. And at the same time, sometimes that really can lead us to staying in things longer than is healthy. So that's something that I would also encourage this listener to think about, is just let's try to have some radical acceptance for what is currently, and just continuing to check in with what is in the here and now. And if this continues to stick around, this pattern in your relationship, and it doesn't go away, how does that affect your decision to stay or go? So I guess we're just really giving some food for thought here. Lots of things to think about because it isn't simple. Like, it isn't easy.
No.
So, yeah.
Okay. On to the next one?
Yes, let's do it.
All right. This one says, I am a total fawner/appeaser. For much of my adult life, I've had to squash my gut instincts on a daily basis to keep safe in unsafe and threatening situations. Between that, active addiction and fear of abandonment, two of my most formidable friendships have been with women 30 plus years older than me who were estranged from their children. My life would fall apart from events they often set in motion. Then they would swoop in to save me and pick up the pieces, and I would end up doing literally anything they asked me to do because I felt needed and indebted to them. I'm now a few years into recovery, happy and healthy, and usually very self-aware and skillful with my mental health, but this insight into my attachment style and friendships is very new to me, and I'm totally stumped on how to move forward. This current person completely fills my past pattern to a T. Not fits. Fits. My goodness. See, Michelle, I can't talk today. I'm going to start that sentence again. This current person completely fits my past pattern to a T. Our friendship has developed way too fast. I've accepted lots of material gifts. She showers me with praise. Whenever I spend time with her outside of class, I lose half a day to helping her with errands and even let myself be around her while she uses my drug of choice in front of me. This is my non-negotiable. I recognize now that I'm getting flooded by triggers and have difficulty checking in with myself when I'm with her.
Yeah, so there's a lot here in this post. The first thing that felt important to address, because I'm not sure if everyone is familiar with it, is really right in that first sentence where the person begins by saying, I'm a total fawner. If people haven't heard of the term fawning, I thought it might be helpful to just share a little bit of what that is. So, even though I could go into like my own definition of it, which basically my definition is looks like codependency. That's kind of how I think of it. But basically, right, if I do a quick Google search of how would you define fawning, just says it's the use of people pleasing to diffuse conflict and feel more secure in relationships and earn the approval of others. It goes on to say it's a maladaptive way of creating safety in our connections with others by essentially mirroring the imagined expectations and desires of other people. So, yeah, you could look at it as, some people might think of it as being this chameleon, right? Like trying to be whoever other people want you to be, and doing that from a place of wanting to, feel safe in relationships. Like, if I don't do what this person wants me to do, or if I'm not who this person expects me to be, if I'm not taking care of them, then this relationship is going to turn unsafe in some way, is a lot of times what drives it. So that's what we mean by that term, if anyone was wondering. One of the first things, though, that came up for me is wondering if this listener has other friendships in their life that they can focus on instead. Because having friendships is an important need. We need friends. We need people in our lives to spend time with, to have fun with. It's really important. And the reason why I think it came up for me first is because I have a feeling that it's going to be a lot easier for this listener to detach from this new connection, this new friendship that they're describing, if they have other people in their life who can also fill that role of friendship. It's a lot harder to walk away when we don't have anybody else.
You're walking away but not towards, kind of?
Yeah, it's exactly that, right? If this listener had other people to also spend time with and, yes, to turn towards, it might make it a lot easier to walk away. But it does kind of sound like, as part of this pattern, I don't know for sure, but it sounds kind of like these relationships are very all-consuming and might wind up pushing out other friendships. So if there are other people to connect with or to reconnect with, that might be a good place to begin. Like trying to get a foundation in place of spending time with other people and then starting to decrease the time spent with this person. Mm-hmm. So I was kind of thinking of that. The other thing that came up for me, which again is like not skill related or anything like that, but gosh, old patterns are really hard to change.
Ugh, yes.
And a lot of times we will think that we've like got it. You know what I mean? Like we'll think, oh, I haven't done that unhealthy thing in so long. Whether it is a drug of choice, whether it is engaging in unhealthy patterns relationship-wise with other people, like we'll think we've got it. And sometimes we don't got it. Mm-hmm. And here's the good news, which I think Kate has this in her notes, so I don't want to say it too much, but I'll echo what Kate's probably about to say, which is like, you are catching this, and that's a big deal. To catch like, whoa, I'm on a slippery slope. I'm having some deja vu here with this friendship. A lot of times we need to listen to our bodies, because our bodies will tell us when we start to feel things like we felt before. They will. And a lot of times we don't notice until it's really big and obvious. But yeah, you're catching that history is repeating. And, you know, like you said, you know, you're sober now. You're where do they talk about that?
Happy and healthy.
Yeah, happy and healthy, years into recovery, skillful with mental health. I mean, this is all great. And also, we're not perfect. We will never be perfect. We will, you know, make mistakes. We will have things repeat in our lives. And what my guess is that because of your newfound healing, you are having a different experience this time, because you're catching things with this person that you might not have caught at all with the other two friendships that you described. Also, because I don't think it's explicitly mentioned, maybe you have an individual therapist and you're actively in therapy. Oh, did you see that too? Shoot.
Yes, you're taking.
You are going to say that. Okay. I'm going to stop, because I did write this down in my notes. I was just thinking about it. Okay. Kate, I'll turn it over to you to continue, because you're about to say what I'm about to say. I think I hit on my main points, so your turn.
Back off, BZ. No.
Sorry.
Anyway, so Michelle's absolutely right. The first two things that I wanted to start off with saying, as opposed to the first two things I wanted to end with saying, that was a weird way of starting things anyway, is first of all, just great job with your insights, right? It may not feel like much to just see what you're doing if you're not immediately changing what you're doing. But let me tell you, from a therapist who works with a lot of people, and also as someone who's been through a lot of therapy, the ability to even see that you're entering into a pattern like that, or that you have a pattern like that, is a pretty big deal. So I hope that you're spending an amount of time being, healthily self-congratulatory, because yeah, that's hard to do. So, kind of echoing something Michelle was saying, actually changing old patterns, real rough, real hard. But you can't change them at all if you're not seeing them. So you have conquered one of the biggest tasks towards change, which is just seeing that you have a thing to change, knowing that you'd like to change it, and that it's not something that's been healthy or served you well. So that's a really big deal. Michelle was mentioning focusing on other friendships, which is a great idea. I was also wondering if you have an individual therapist to work with. Just because obviously if you're working with an individual therapist, they are going to know a lot more about you than Michelle and I can or do from this post. So they will be more aware of the nuances and the in and outs and the complexities of your life and this relationship for you. If you don't already have an individual therapist, it might be a good time to see one, even if it's just temporarily, right? Not all, I tend to be a long hauler, both in my private therapy and with my clients. So I have people who've been seeing me 5+ years, and I've been seeing my therapist for 10. But lots of people come into therapy for tackling a problem, right? Like, I've got most of the rest of my life pretty well in hand, but I could use some support and advice in this particular issue. And that's a fine thing to use therapy for. That's great. It just means it's going to be, shorter term, since you're just tackling this one issue. But if you don't already have a therapist, one recommendation I would be is maybe look into getting one. So you have that unconditional positive regard and support as you go through something that's difficult, if maybe you don't have that in partners or other friendships. And also someone who's just going to be able to know you and your life a lot better, and be able to kind of give guidance, support, or advice from a position of being more well-informed. Just to throw it out there, I would imagine this friendship might not be serving you great. If you don't feel like you can exit it, that makes sense, but do keep exiting the friendship in your mind as an option, I guess is what I would say. It's wonderful if you can manage to sort of, course correct within the friendship, and change your own boundaries and behavior in such a way that it makes the friendship a safe and healthy and boundaried space for you. And also, if this is a brand new thing that you're recognizing and you've never tried to tackle it before, that might be an unreasonable expectation to have of yourself. And so it might be easier to, maybe not all at once, maybe all at once, right? That, how you do it is kind of up to you, but, it might, I don't know how to phrase that. Just keep ending the friendship in mind as an option, right? I think a lot of the times we can be prone to assuming that we have to change ourselves in the way we want to change right now, right? So like, well, it's my fault that I have this pattern and I need to fix me and the fact that I do this. Which, maybe it's obvious from the profession I'm in, but I fully support, endorse, understand, and think of the healing power of self-change. Everyone's capable of it. And it's a wonderful process to undergo. Also, it's a process. It takes time. You're not going to snap your fingers and immediately exit a pattern you've had for most of your life. That's just not how that goes. And so maybe you need space from this friendship in order to work on not having friendships like this in the future. It really depends on how negatively it's impacting you, and also just, how more could it impact, like how much more could it impact you, and what other ways could it impact you if you stay in it through the whole time that you're trying to make this shift or change in yourself, because by then it might have done a lot of damage. So again, Michelle and I don't know enough about this. This is similar actually in my own mind to the first question, which is I don't want to carte blanche give therapeutic advice like get out of that friendship. Mm-hmm. But I do want to say, don't forget that that's one option on the menu. It's just not being in that friendship anymore. So Michelle, actually, you have a better memory for this than I do. We did boundaries episode, right? Mm-hmm. That was a thing.
Yep.
Okay. So if you haven't already, listener, I would highly recommend going back and finding that episode. It might be really helpful for you in the context of this friendship if and or while you're choosing to remain in it. I don't know that we talk much about any actually explicit DBT skills in that episode, because it's just something that Michelle and I have found our groups really want us to talk about most of the time, so we thought we'd include it. But I think it's definitely worth a listen, and you might be able to get some really helpful stuff out of it. And last but not least, because I think Michelle and I do try and have at least one DBT skill in one of our answers for every question, I thought that fast is probably the skill I would most strongly recommend, especially in light of that one line, maybe the one that got my attention the most, which is talking about this person using your drug of choice in front of you and that being your non-negotiable, right? When I hear words like non-negotiable, I think of values. And when it comes to standing up for and standing firm in our values, fast is the skill to go to. So yeah, those are my thoughts.
Yeah, great. Okay, next one says, I recently left a job I really loved with an immediate resignation due to needing to create an extremely quick and solid boundary for myself. A coworker I really admired has BPD and was going through DBT, and we would openly talk about therapy. She's the one who introduced me to DBT, and I found the podcast, and it really resonated with me. I've been having a really hard time this week with judging myself and thinking about all the shoulds I could have done to advocate for myself at this job. Then they give a list of the issues, which says added responsibilities with no raise, lack of appreciation, feedback, gaslighting, emotional manipulation, favoritism, and nepotism. They say, I find myself constantly wanting to explain why I left to my ex-boss and to warn people that want to work there how unethical the business actually is. I've eliminated things from social media dealing with the past job, but I'm really feeling inadequate and I'm ruminating a lot. I wanted to share to see if anyone may have a specific skill that may be helpful with the triggers appearing that remind me of this job, or how I can effectively deal with my separation. I've been trying radical acceptance, dime game, and tip, but I'm just really struggling with little support.
Ouch. That sounds like a hard space to be in.
Yeah.
They didn't explicitly frame it this way, but it sounds to me like part of the loss of the job that's hard is losing that coworker that
I was thinking the same thing.
Could really connect with. And that's hard because, I don't know what country this person is in either, but there's a lot of places and times where we don't have or can't find someone we can talk to openly about mental health stuff. And so I know that can be a real gift. And yeah, I imagine that's also a really big loss. But this person was asking for specific skills, so I mostly just wanted to offer the top 3 that came to mind for me. Anytime someone mentions ruminating, I think about accepts, just as kind of immediate forms of distraction, especially the T for thoughts or thinking. You can listen to the episode. Michelle and I have some suggestions in there for different things you can do for each of these letters and accepts, but distraction, right? You gotta keep knocking your thoughts off that particular track. And a lot of things in accepts can be really good for doing that. Because, you can't keep the triggers from showing up. At least if I'm understanding correctly, these are triggers of just things you're running into in the world or in your life that remind you of the job. And that's to an extent unavoidable, right? Once you start trying to avoid something that hard, it can really make your life small. So the way I think about it is you're not going to wholly get away from triggers. So how do you deal with it once you've been triggered and that sort of rumination train is starting down the tracks? And yeah, accepts is the first thing I think about. And then the next 2, I feel like such a broken record because they're always the things that I recommend, it feels like. But the first one is self-soothe, right? This person talked about feeling inadequate. And at least to me, like inadequacy feels really, I don't know, one of those like tender hurts, right? Like that's a sad, ouchy feeling to me. And so when I think about that kind of emotion, I think about self-soothe for helping with it. I don't know, I guess tips is very physical, but radical acceptance and dime game in their own way, which are 2 of the ones that this person mentions trying before, are very intellect based, right? You're thinking about things in a different way, or right, you're trying to reason your way through something with the Dime game. It's very, neck up, right? Very, very intellectual. And so one of the things I like about self-soothe is that it tends to be very physical. And so it's a way of comforting your sort of entire system without maybe needing to bring your brain along quite as much, because your brain might not be in a great place for supporting you in any given moment, if it's where those shoulds and sense of inadequacies and ruminations are coming from. So accepts to knock your brain off of its tracks, self-soothe to sort of bring your body into a more sustainable space, a kinder, softer, more taken care of kind of space. And then last but never least, just wise mind, right? I think looking down that Michelle's gonna, engage in her superpower of finding DBT skills and things that people do. But I think in wise mind, one of the things that this listener might discover is that they've been doing a really good job. Like, I think people always assume that if they're feeling shitty, they're doing a bad job at their skills.
Mm-hmm.
And that just isn't true. Shitty isn't a non-off switch. And sadly, I think most people listening to this podcast, most humans probably know that no matter how bad you're feeling, you could be feeling worse. Right? There's always more shitty. So, like, if you're feeling shitty, that doesn't mean you're not feeling a lot less shitty than you would be if you weren't trying to employ your skills. Plus, also, that seems like a real loss. If you loved the work and you had that close connection with a coworker, it's gonna suck to lose that, to leave that, right? And so feeling shitty is a pretty natural reaction to shitty things. So yeah, I think maybe in your wise mind, this person might be able to see what they've already accomplished better than maybe they are right now. And also, I think wise mind can often be the antithesis to shoulds. Or not antithesis, though that too. The antidote. That was the actual word I wanted. Mm-hmm. The antidote to shoulds, right? Because wise mind can really evaluate them and be like, really? Is that an actual moral imperative, right? Like, is that actually something you need or ought to be, shoulding yourself about? Or is that just a wish? I wish I'd known better beforehand. I wish I'd acted differently, right? Like, there's space for regret in your life, but you don't want to just live there. And so wise mind, I think, can also help pull you a bit back from what you're immersed in and help you see the whole picture better. And part of that whole picture is that you really have been doing a good job, even if you're still struggling. Mm-hmm. So those are my 3.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, even though we've touched on it throughout the Q&A so far, of like, which again, I think we really try to refrain from telling people like, do this, don't do that, like you did the right thing, or that sort of an idea. Like, I don't know, listener, when you list out the issues with this job,
yeah,
I think you did the right thing by leaving. I do. I think if you had stayed in this job, it would have taken more of a toll on your mental health. And the skill that I was thinking of like a skill that you were maybe using when you made this decision to leave this job is that you were probably using FAST, right? Being fair to yourself, not apologizing, sticking to your values, and being truthful. However, I get the sense that for you may feel like there's some unfinished business here. Because sometimes when there's something we believe in so fiercely and so strongly, and it violates our boundaries and our values so much, like we don't want to let it go, if that makes sense. Like you said, you want to warn people about how unethical the business is, and you want to like really tell your ex-boss about all the reasons why you left. And so it really sounds to me like there's something here about like you did what you needed to do for you, and yet like you're also wanting to do more.
Mm-hmm.
That doing more piece can get really tricky. And I think about, which I've said before, I think many times on the podcast now, I really come back to the serenity prayer a lot.
Mm.
To have the courage to accept, gosh, now I'm blanking on the first. I know it by heart. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
There we go.
What you can change is whether or not you stay at this job. And you've already changed that. What you probably can't change is long-standing issues within this organization. Doesn't mean you might not be able to do anything, but I would really look at just like what is driving that for you. And it might not be something bad, right? There can be something really empowering about, like, I don't know, organizing strikes and getting petitions together. Like, I'm not saying that's what this listener necessarily wants to do, but just as like general examples, there can be something that feels really good about, like, I'm taking a stand about this thing that I know is wrong. And also, like, you can just pat yourself on the back too for being like, and I took care of myself, and maybe that's enough. You can take that route too. And I feel like this listener might be having a hard enough time believing that they've done enough. When you did, you got yourself out of a bad situation. That's huge. And again, I'm guessing you used elements or principles of FAST to help you get to that place. So, good job. It's okay to just kind of leave it there. Even if those issues are still going to exist within the organization, that might be more than you can take on. Kate also touched on this, and I thought of this too. Sometimes when it comes to this idea of grief, we think that if something was bad for us, and if we hated it and really disliked it, and it felt shitty, right? To use what Kate was saying earlier, that there's not going to be grief. That we're going to be like, thank God I'm out, and we're only going to feel relief. We're not going to feel any sadness. We're not going to feel any regret. We're not going to feel anything else. We're just going to feel awesome when we're done with that thing that was so unhealthy for us. That's a myth. It's a myth.
Yep.
Sometimes people have that experience, but more often than not, the experience of leaving anything, jobs, relationships, houses that you've lived in, leaving anything is a lot more complex than just good or bad. So even if this job was really bad in a lot of ways, I sensed what Kate was sensing. I don't think it's a coincidence that you started this post with talking about this coworker that you were close to. Even if that was just meant to be a way to be like, this is how I found the podcast. Gosh, I'd be feeling grief losing a coworker like that. I'd feel sad about that. And that may also be part of what's going on for you, is sort of this unfinished business piece that I was touching on, is that you feel some grief for the fact that this job is still going to treat their employees like crap. Like, you feel grief for the people who are maybe still there in that situation and feeling powerless to know what to do about it. That would be some grief. So even when we're happy to be rid of something that wasn't feeling good, grief can still arise. And I think it can be very helpful and healing to view things through the lens of grief. What am I missing about this thing? Or what feels unfinished to me about this thing? And what did I get out of this thing? Even if the thing was really terrible, there might have been some good things that still happened, like some good experiences that you still had at one point in time. This is why people struggle to really leave abusive relationships. Because guess what? The relationship is not 100% all bad. Like, there were good times too. And people really struggle to sometimes detach from the positive aspects of an experience. there were probably some positive aspects to this job, even beyond just the coworker that we know about. There were probably some other things too. So giving yourself some time and space to grieve. It's not going to be just as simple as, like they say, you know, I've eliminated things from social media. I'm just trying to not think about it. It's not going to be that easy. And Kate already gave some great DBT skills that might help lessen that. And also just be patient with yourself. You're going to feel a whole range of emotions here. I think that's what I'm trying to say. And that's all normal and that's all okay. Yeah.
I think we're on the last one. Also, looking ahead at your notes, you totally start with the same thing that I start with, but that's okay. I think we'll say it differently, maybe.
Yes, we're probably going to say it differently because I knew, well, at least I had a strong feeling of where you were going, and so I think I can avoid saying what you mean to say, but we'll see how we do.
All right, the last one reads, okay, I'm not sure if this will technically be DBT related, but there might be a skill I don't know about. Even when I'm using my skills and thinking wisely about the situation, I cry. Everything makes me cry. It's really always been like this, and it's really frustrating, especially when I realize there's no real reason to be crying, 10 minutes into my skills, and that just tends to make me cry more. So, does anyone have any tips or tricks for tricking or short-circuiting your brain out of the crying response?
Yeah. First thing that came up for me, which we were just talking about crying in a recent Q&A episode. So some of this might be repetitive from that, but I don't feel like we could say any of this too much. This is important stuff to drive home. There are far worse emotional reactions than crying. So this is your go-to emotional reaction, listener, right? Some people's go-to emotional reaction is to raise their voice and start yelling and reacting in anger. Which also, anger is not necessarily unhealthy, right? But we want to be really mindful of how we're expressing that anger so that it's not negatively impacting the people around us or ourselves or things like that. So some people go to that. Some people have a very physical response, which again might not be anger. It could be shame or other things. But some people, it looks like they go to a place of self-harm as like their go-to. Some people, it looks like they go to a drug of some kind as their go-to. Like there can be lots of things that people go to when they feel an emotion really strongly. Crying is arguably one of the healthier options out of the list of examples that I'm giving. So, just something to think about. I'm not going to steal what Kate is going to say. I'm going to just move on to the next thing because, again, I don't know what all is going on here. There's a lot, as with any post, right, that we're not aware of. My sense here for what's going on with this listener is that it's maybe not so much that they're having a problem with crying. It's the timing of the crying. Or it's the feeling really out of control with the crying. Like, maybe it's something where it's like, oh yeah, I know crying is like healthy. Like I have no problems crying in my room at home by myself. It's when I'm, answering phones at work because I'm in customer service and I catch myself almost tearing up on the phone with a customer, right? Like, where it feels very sudden and it feels very outside of your control. And let's be honest, our society doesn't always have the best responses to crying. If someone sees you crying, they, sometimes assume that you're like emotionally weak or, they again assume it's coming from a place of sadness, which it is not always coming from a place of sadness for people with crying. So I think maybe that's what this listener is getting at is like, I'm okay crying sometimes, but when everything is making me cry and it's coming up so out of the blue and I feel like I have no control over it, that's what I want the help with. And I totally respect that. So, in terms of what I think could be helpful with that, with DBT skills, First thing, make sure you are working on please. Please is a great place to begin when we're having emotional responses that feel really big and overwhelming, and again, kind of result in us feeling like our emotions are running the show and that we don't really have control over how they're showing up or what they're looking like. Go back to please. Go back to some of those basics when it comes to taking care of your physical body. Because there may be some days where if your please skills are not on point, you're going to be more likely to have that crying come up when you're least expecting it and least wanting it. It makes you more emotionally vulnerable when you're not practicing please, when you're not taking care of your physical self. So that's the first thing I would recommend. The second thing I was thinking of, which I know this may be difficult, having a therapist may help with this if you don't already, but there may be, even though you mentioned that there are some things that you're not aware of for like why the tears are coming up, like, I don't know why I'm crying, right? Which I think could be a pretty common experience. The tears just begin and we don't know exactly why. There also may be some things where you can clearly see a connection. Hey, when this thing happens, pretty inevitably I cry. You might be able to connect some dots already for yourself of what triggers crying for you. And if you know what some of those triggers are, the absolute minute that trigger happens, the skill I would recommend going to is stop. Right? So as a reminder of what that stands for, stop. Which is always so funny that the S stands for stop. Stop, take a step back, observe, and proceed mindfully. I haven't talked about this skill in a while, but I'm 99% positive that's what it stands for. So try, if you can, if at all possible, to take those steps immediately. This may mean that you excuse yourself to go to the bathroom, and guess what? Those tears may still come. They still may happen. It's possible. And yet, hopefully, you still feel a little more empowered, a little more in the driver's seat, a little bit more like, hey, I made a conscious choice of what to do here, rather than feeling like the tears are just overtaking you instantly and then you don't know what to do. It may help to take that little bit of a step back to be able to put the thing that just happened on pause and go take care of yourself a little bit before you come back. So those are the two skills I would recommend are please and stop for this. But yeah, I get it. It's not fun to feel like hijacked by crying. That's not fun. No. So, yeah.
Okay, so very similar to Michelle's first point of, there are worse emotional reactions than crying. I just wondered, why is the crying bad? Right? Is it maybe, Michelle, I think you talked about some really great things. Like maybe it's not that the crying is bad. Maybe this person would be perfectly happy having, crying spats, regularly, just they're happening in places and times where it's deemed inappropriate or is having backlash for them or things like that. So not saying there are no reasons to want to be shifting this, but I also wondered if the person had really stopped to think about, why is it bad? What's it doing? Is it actually harmful? Is it actually bringing about negative repercussions? Or do we just, do you just have judgment around crying that maybe is unnecessary or unwarranted? Because it's really, it's not, crying isn't unhealthy in and of itself. Crying isn't usually bad in and of itself. So yeah, I was just hoping to, I guess, encourage this listener to, how do I want to put it, to have some curiosity. Because, sometimes we just jump to an immediate conclusion of, oh, this is bad because the culture or people around us or the people who raised us or other stuff said that it was bad. And maybe if we stop and consider it for ourselves, we don't share the same opinion. So, not trying to indicate that this person will definitely come to a different conclusion, but wanting to, sort of see. The next thing that I was thinking about is, I don't know, of all of the things that were said in the, I don't know if this was a post or an email, but the line, when I realize there's no real reason to be crying. What does no real reason mean? How invalidating of yourself are you being with that statement? Because let me tell you, there's a lot of fucking reasons to cry. You'd be crying about something that's happening right now. You can be crying about something that happened in the past. You'd be crying in fear about something happening in the future. There's a not small number of people who are crying these days on a regular basis just because of the state of things, the state of the world. There's... Man, this sounds more Debbie Downer than I mean it to be, because I'm actually a pretty upbeat kind of human. But also, if you just quote unquote, randomly burst out crying every day, I think you could probably find decent reasons to point at.
Yeah.
There's a lot of bad shit.
Well, this is kind of a woo-woo reason, but I tell my clients this sometimes. Like, we only get one physical body. And sure, you may have had surgeries or lots of things happen to your body, but this physical body that you are inhabiting right now is the physical body that you have inhabited since the day you were born. And so sometimes when we're having physiological reactions like crying, our bodies are pretty remarkable with like being able to kind of store and recall what we've experienced before. So it may not be something that you're consciously aware of, but something that's happening in the here and now may be very similar to something that, say, you experienced when you were 5. And your body can kind of remember what that felt like, and that is going to have a response. So yeah. There could be lots of reasons.
Right? And sometimes we just need it. It's a good release.
Yeah.
Right? It's healing very much in its own way. So I guess, as soon as I read the no real reason thing, my eyebrow crept up, because that sounds real judgy. And so I just thought maybe some curiosity about both, like, why is the crying bad? And is it actually? And what does that no real reason mean? Is it just a reason you don't think is good enough? Because my guess is if you're crying, some part of you thinks it's good enough. So, just a thought. And then just to end on an actual skill, the skill I thought of the most for quote-unquote sort of short-circuiting your brain out of the crying process would be tip. Now, grant you, I generally think of tip for when people are super flooded and overwhelmed, and if this person says they cry at everything, that means it sounds like to me they think they cry with less provocation, so tip may not be the best. If you're not actually flooded, you're just trying to get yourself to stop crying, but it would probably still work. It's just a question of, is short-circuiting that process in your brain actually the healthiest thing to do? That's all. Those are my thoughts.
Nice. Okay, we're done. So if you have questions for us, you can email them at dbtmepodcast@gmail.com, and also post about them in the Facebook group. Once again, I think a large number of these came from the Facebook group that we read today in the episode, because, again, not only then you get an opinion from Kate and or myself, but you can get opinions and advice and help from other people, and the community is really great. So you can either email us or post in the Facebook group, and we'll be back soon.
All right.
Thank you, guys.
Goodbye, everyone.
To learn more about us and the DBT skills we're teaching each week, join our Facebook group. Simply log in to your Facebook profile and search for DBT